The email arrived an hour before the service was set to begin. My phone buzzed in my purse, a low, insistent vibration against the stillness of the empty church. It wasn't from my son, Robert. It was from his assistant. The subject line was just 2 words: Ray, funeral. I opened it. The light from the stained glass window painted my shaking hands blue and red. The message was 1 sentence. Unfortunately, Robert cannot close the office for this. It is not economically feasible. Economically unfeasible. The words didn't land. They shattered. Something inside me didn't break. It froze. The tears I'd been holding back for days simply turned to ice. My heartbeat, which had been a flutter of grief, became something else. A machine. Thump, thump, thump. I slipped the phone back into my purse. The click of the clasp echoed like a gunshot in the silence. The pastor was standing by the altar, his face a mask of pity, waiting for my signal to begin. He was looking at me, then at the long, empty pews where my family was supposed to be. I met his gaze. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I just gave him a single, clear nod. Begin. And then I turned and walked out. I didn't wait for the scripture. I didn't wait for the eulogy. Let the pastor preach to the empty chairs. The business couldn't wait, and neither could I. I didn't go home to the ghosts. I didn't go to the cemetery to watch them lower an empty box of memories. I went to the one place that was apparently more important than my husband's soul, the office. The building felt alien. The big oak doors I had helped David pick out now had a sleek, silver logo on them I didn't recognize. Innovate, optimize, dominate. It was the language of machines, not men. I pushed through the doors into the lobby, and I stopped. Something was wrong. The whole space felt hollow, sterile, and then I saw it. Or rather, I saw what wasn't there. The wall opposite the reception desk was empty. For 30 years, a portrait of David had hung there, a real painting, one that caught him mid-laugh, his eyes crinkling at the corners. It was the first thing you saw when you came in. It was a statement. It said this place was built by a human being with a soul. Now, there was just a pale rectangle on the wallpaper, a ghost of a frame, an erasure. They hadn't just decided his funeral was bad for business. They had already started to write him out of the company's history. There was a pale rectangle on the wallpaper where the portrait used to be, a ghost of a frame. I stood there, just staring at that blank space. It was more offensive than any argument, any angry word could ever have been. It was an erasure. Mrs. Gable, can I help you? The receptionist was new, a young girl with sharp features and a headset that seemed permanently attached to her ear. She looked at me like I was a piece of old furniture someone had forgotten to move. I'm here to see my son, I said. My voice sounded thin. Before she could answer, I heard Amanda's laugh. It was a sharp, brittle sound, like glass breaking. It came from the hallway. She was walking with 2 men in suits I didn't know, holding a tablet. So by trimming the legacy staff, she was saying, her voice carrying across the marble floor, we can reallocate those pension funds to the 4th quarter marketing push. It's a simple matter of optimization. Legacy staff. She meant people like Mary, David's secretary for 30 years. People who remembered when the company was just a dream sketched on a napkin at our kitchen table. People who were being trimmed. Amanda saw me then. Her smile didn't falter, but it tightened. It was the smile she used for photos, the one that didn't reach her eyes. Margaret, what are you doing here? You should be home resting. She came over and put a hand on my arm. It felt like a bird's claw, cold and possessive. We were so sorry to miss the service. Robert was just trapped in back-to-back meetings. You know how it is. I looked at her hand on my arm, then back at her face. I know how it is, I said. She steered me down the hall. away from the men. "Robert's just in his father's office. I'm sure he'll be thrilled to see you for a minute." His father's office. The words were a casual land grab. The door was open. Robert was sitting behind David's desk. His desk. The one I'd helped David refinish in our garage, back when we couldn't afford a new one. Robert was hunched over, staring intently at a screen filled with charts and graphs. He didn't look up when we walked in. "Look who's here," Amanda said brightly. He finally glanced up. There was a flash of something in his eyes, annoyance, guilt, before it was replaced by a look of strained concern. "Mom, you shouldn't be here. You need to rest. It's been a long day." He stood up, but he didn't come around the desk. He stayed behind it, using it as a shield. My son. He was a stranger in his father's chair. I didn't answer him. My eyes were scanning the room. Everything had been changed. David's books on history and biography were gone, replaced by rows of identical binders with corporate-looking labels. The worn leather armchair in the corner where he used to sit and think was gone, replaced by a sleek, uncomfortable-looking white sofa. The family photos on the credenza of Robert as a boy on his first bicycle, of our family on vacation, had been replaced by glass awards and plaques. They had sanitized the room. They had stripped every trace of David out of it, just like they had taken his portrait off the wall. They hadn't just taken over his company. They were systematically erasing any evidence that he had ever existed. My gaze finally landed on Robert. He was shifting his weight, looking at Amanda, then back at me. He looked like a little boy who had been caught doing something wrong and was waiting for his mother to start yelling. But I wasn't going to yell. The ice in my chest was solid now. It was a foundation. I wasn't there as a grieving mother anymore. "The office has changed," I said. My voice was quiet, but it cut through the air. Robert managed a weak smile. "Yes, Amanda's been a huge help, streamlining things, bringing us into the 21st century. He patted a stack of papers on the desk. "It's a different world now, Mom. All about efficiency. No room for sentiment. No room for sentiment." The echo of economically unfeasible was deafening. He was using the language they had taught him, the language of the business I had helped build, to justify wiping his own father from memory. I remembered the nights I'd stayed up with David, going over the books, using our own savings to make payroll when things were tight. I remembered signing the papers that put our house up as collateral for his first big loan. Was that sentiment, or was it an investment? An investment in him, in this company, in this boy, standing in front of me. I just stood there, in the middle of the room he had hollowed out, and I looked at my son. I saw the expensive suit he wore, the watch on his wrist, the confidence that wasn't earned but inherited. He and his wife, they saw me as a relic, a legacy item to be managed, a sentimental cost on a balance sheet. They thought they had already won. They thought they had trimmed everything that wasn't profitable. As I turned to leave, I passed Mary's old desk outside the office. It was empty. A cardboard box sat on the chair with a few sad-looking personal items in it. But Mary herself was standing by the elevators, holding her coat. She saw me. Our eyes met. She was a woman my age, a woman who had given her life to this company. Her eyes weren't filled with pity for me. They were filled with a deep, weary understanding. She knew what had happened. She knew what they had become. She gave me the slightest, almost imperceptible nod, and in that moment, standing there, in that cold, strange lobby, looking at the blank space on the wall, I knew this wasn't an ending. It wasn't about grief or loss anymore. It was about justice. It was about restoring the soul of a place that had lost its way. They thought I was a sentimental old woman. They had no idea who I really was. They had forgotten that I was there when the first brick was laid, and I remembered where all the other bricks were buried, one head down. When I got home from the office, the silence was different. It wasn't the empty silence of grief anymore. It was the quiet of a chessboard before the first move. I walked through the living room, past the armchairs where David and I had sat for 40 years, past the fireplace that hadn't been lit since he got sick. Amanda had offered to have a design consultant come over to update the space. I understood now what that meant. It meant erasing. I didn't take my coat off. I walked straight to his study at the back of the house. It was the one room they hadn't touched, probably because it was filled with old files and books they considered junk. To me, it was the only place that still felt like him. It smelled of old paper and his pipe tobacco, a scent that clung to the curtains like a memory. I didn't turn on the main light, just the small green banker's lamp on his desk. The room was a fortress of his life's work, floor-to-ceiling shelves, crammed with books on engineering, finance, history, his real education. On the wall was a framed photo of the two of us, young, standing on the empty patch of land where he would one day build the first factory. We looked impossibly young, and so sure of ourselves. I ran my fingers along the spines of the books on the shelf behind his desk. Third shelf down, fifth book from the left, a worn copy of The Wealth of Nations, just as he'd told me 100 times. I pulled it out. Behind it was the small black dial of a wall safe. My fingers were a little stiff, but they remembered the combination. His birthday, my birthday, our anniversary. A sentimental man, my David. The world only saw the titan of industry. I knew the man who used our special dates to protect our future. The safe opened with a soft click. It wasn't full of money or jewels. It was full of paper. Old files, deeds, and one thick, leather-bound folder. I pulled it out and carried it to the desk. The gold lettering on the front was faded. Gable Industries. Articles of incorporation. I sat in his chair. The leather creaked, a familiar, comforting sound. For a long moment I just sat there, my hands on this folder. It felt warm. Then I picked up the phone from his desk and dialed a number I hadn't needed to look up in 30 years. He answered on the second ring. Arthur. His voice was older, gravelly, but it was the same steady sound that had calmed me through countless crises. Arthur, it's Margaret Gable. There was a pause, not of surprise, but of profound sadness. Margaret, I was at the service. I am so terribly sorry for your loss, and I was sorry not to see Robert. That's why I'm calling, Arthur. I took a breath. The air in the room felt heavy, charged. Do you remember what David used to say all those years ago when he was drafting the succession plan? He had a little phrase for it, a contingency. I could almost hear Arthur nodding on the other end of the line. I remember, he said, his voice low. For in case the boy loses his mind. I think that case has arrived, I said. The silence that followed was different. It was the silence of a loyal soldier hearing a call to arms. Where are you, Margaret? I'm in his study. I have the original articles. Don't move, he said. I'll be there in half an hour. When Arthur arrived, he looked older than I remembered. His shoulders were a little stooped, but his eyes were as sharp and intelligent as ever. He was carrying a worn leather briefcase. He didn't offer empty platitudes. He just gave my hand a firm squeeze and said, Let's see what we have. We sat at the big mahogany desk, the green lamp casting a small pool of light on the documents between us. The house was utterly still around us. It felt like a war room. They've removed his portrait from the lobby, I told him quietly as he opened the folder. Arthur stopped and looked at me. He didn't say anything, but his jaw tightened. He understood. That one detail told him everything he needed to know about the new regime. He opened the leather-bound articles. The paper was thick, creamy, and covered in David's elegant, slightly slanted handwriting from the early days, before everything was typed and printed by computers. Arthur turned the pages slowly, his finger tracing the lines of legal text. He knew this document as well as I did. He had helped David write it. "They've been busy," Arthur murmured, looking at a series of more recent, stapled-on amendments. Amanda's fingerprints are all over these. Shifting voting rights, creating new executive share classes, all perfectly legal, of course. They've been building a fortress around Robert. "But they live in a fortress David built," I said. "And he knew where he put the doors." Arthur looked up at me and smiled, a real smile. "That he did, Margaret. That he did." He kept turning pages past the amendments deeper into the original core of the document. "Here we are," he said softly. "Article 7, Section B." He slid the book towards me. I leaned forward, my reading glasses perched on my nose. The clause wasn't long. It was written in plain language, not legalese. David had insisted on that. He'd said, "What's the point of a rule if the people it's for can't understand it?" It stated that in the event of the CEO, David's designated heir, taking any action which causes significant and demonstrable harm to the foundational values or public reputation of the company, a review could be triggered. If the review found the claim valid, David's controlling block of shares, the shares Robert had inherited, would not be stripped from the family. David would never do that. Instead, they would be transferred immediately into a pre-established legacy trust. The purpose of the trust was to safeguard the long-term integrity of the company over short-term profits. And then, the final line. "The sole trustee and administrator of said trust shall be my wife, Margaret Gable." I read it twice. I remembered the night he'd written it. We were in the kitchen. Robert was upstairs, a teenager, probably sneaking out his window to see some girl. David had looked at me over his glasses and said, "This is for you, so you always have the last word, to protect this family from itself." At the time, I thought he was being overly dramatic. Now, I saw it for what it was, the single most prescient, most loving act of his entire life. He had seen the man his son might become, the woman his son might marry, and he had built me an ark. "So," I said, my voice barely a whisper, "what does it mean, Arthur?" "It means," Arthur said, leaning back in the chair and looking at me with a kind of awe, "that Robert is the CEO, but you, my dear Margaret, are the chairman of the board. He's been driving his father's car, but you've been holding the keys the entire time." A wave of something washed over me. It wasn't triumph. It was a profound, aching sense of responsibility. The ice in my chest didn't melt, but it felt purposeful. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about honoring a promise I didn't even know I'd made. "His absence at the funeral," I said, thinking aloud. "His assistant sent an email, said it wasn't economically feasible. Is that demonstrable harm to the company's reputation?" Arthur's eyes lit up with a strategist's fire. The founder's own son and CEO skipping his funeral for business reasons? In a company that built its brand on family values and loyalty? Margaret, that's not just demonstrable harm. That's a corporate hydrogen bomb. And I'd bet my entire pension that the email was Amanda's idea. "What do? We follow the rules," he said, tapping the old document. "We call an emergency meeting of the board. The charter allows any primary shareholder to do so. That's still you. We present the evidence, the email, the testimony from the legacy staff they're firing, the fact that the founder's portrait is gone. We make the case that these actions demonstrate a profound disregard for the company's core values. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. We trigger the clause. He began to pack his briefcase, his movements crisp and efficient. The old, stooped lawyer was gone. In his place was the formidable attorney David had always trusted. "I'll draft the notice for the meeting tonight," he said. "We'll give them 48 hours notice, as the bylaws require. They won't see it coming. They'll think you're just a grieving widow making a scene. They'll be prepared for hysterics. We will give them a surgical, legal execution." After he left, I stayed in the study for a long time. The yellowed charter lay open on the desk. It was more than a document. It was a weapon. It was a shield. It was David's last letter to me. My son was busy with his charts and graphs, optimizing the future. He had forgotten the most important rule of business, the one his father had taught him from the beginning. You can't build anything new if you destroy the foundation. And I was the foundation. Ingrained. The 48 hours after Arthur left were the quietest of my life. The storm of grief had passed, and the ice inside me wasn't cold anymore. It was just solid. I moved through the house, making tea, looking out the window, and I waited. Arthur had sent the email with the official notice for the emergency board meeting from his office the next morning. He forwarded me a copy. The subject line was bland, professional, notice of special meeting of the board of directors. But the agenda item he listed was anything but. Agenda Item 1. Review of recent executive actions in relation to Article 7, Section B of the Corporate Charter. It was a declaration of war written on legal letterhead. My phone started ringing an hour later. It was Robert. His picture, a smiling, professional headshot he'd had taken, popped up on the screen. I looked at it, then set the phone face down on the kitchen counter. The buzzing vibrated through the granite, a frantic, angry sound. It rang for a full minute before stopping. 5 seconds later, it started again. I let it go to voicemail. Then, a text message. "Mom, what is this? Call me. Arthur won't take my call." Another one. Moments later. "This is a mistake. You don't understand." I wiped the counter with a cloth, my movements slow and deliberate. The phone buzzed again. This time it was Amanda. Her name glowed on the screen. I imagined her face, sharp and furious, her voice like nails on a chalkboard. I let it ring until it, too, fell silent. For the rest of the day, they took turns. A barrage of calls, texts, emails, a crescendo of panic. They were like children who had been caught breaking a precious vase and couldn't understand why their usual excuses weren't working. It was all noise. I didn't answer a single one. I was done listening. That evening, just after dusk, a pair of headlights swept across my living room window, splashing light across the walls. A car door slammed shut, the sound unnaturally loud in the quiet street. Then another. Of course. If the phone doesn't work, you just show up. You force the confrontation. I was in the kitchen, and I watched their silhouettes pass the window. I didn't move. I waited for the doorbell. When it rang, it was a long, insistent peal, not the polite chime of a visitor. It was a demand. I walked to the front door, my slippers silent on the hardwood floor. I could see them through the frosted glass, two impatient shapes shifting their weight. I took a deep breath, not to calm myself, but to steady myself. I felt the solidness inside me, the foundation that David had left me. Then I turned the lock and opened the door. I didn't open it all the way. I stood in the doorway, my hand on the knob, blocking the entrance. They looked smaller, standing on my porch, without the armor of their office and their titles. They just looked like a middle-aged couple in a panic. Robert's face was pale, his eyes wide with a mixture of anger and a kind of pleading confusion. Amanda stood slightly behind him, her arms crossed, her jaw set like concrete. She was the one holding the anger for both of them. "Mom, for God's sake," Robert started, his voice a strained whisper. "What are you doing? Why wouldn't you answer the phone? You have to call this off." "Hello, Robert." "Amanda?" I said. My voice was calm, even. I was a stranger to myself. "Don't hello, Robert, me," Amanda snapped, pushing forward. "What is this nonsense about Article 7? You're dragging the family's name through the mud." "The family's name?" I looked directly at her. I think that was already accomplished when the CEO of Gable Industries decided his father's funeral was not economically feasible. Robert flinched as if I'd struck him. That one phrase, spoken aloud in the cold night air, seemed to suck all the energy out of him. That's not what I meant," he stammered. "Amanda we thought it would be more efficient." "I don't care what you thought," I said, my gaze still locked on him. "I only care about what you did. This is crazy," he pleaded, reaching a hand out as if to touch my arm. I didn't move back, but my stillness was its own kind of wall. "We can fix this. We're family. We can talk about this inside." He tried to take a step forward into the warmth of the house. I didn't move. I was the gate. "No," I said. The word hung in the air between us. It was so simple, so final. "We will not be talking about this inside," I continued, my voice perfectly level. "All questions will be discussed at the board meeting tomorrow. This is no longer a family discussion, Robert." I paused, and I let my eyes drift from my son to my daughter-in-law, the architect of this cold, new world. "This is business. You both made it very clear how important that is." Amanda's eyes narrowed into slits. She opened her mouth to say something venomous, I'm sure, but I didn't give her the chance. I looked at my son, the boy whose scraped knees I had bandaged, whose fears I had soothed in the middle of the night. I saw nothing of him in the man standing before me, so I did the only thing there was left to do. I swung the door closed. It didn't slam. It closed with a solid, definitive thud. The lock clicked into place. I stood there for a long moment, my hand still on the doorknob, listening. I heard Amanda's furious, muffled voice, then Robert's, trying to placate her. Then, the sound of their footsteps retreating down the path. Car doors opened, then slammed shut with a final, impotent rage. The engine roared to life, and the headlights swept across my walls one last time before disappearing down the street. The house was silent again. But this time, it was my silence. A silence I owned. I leaned my forehead against the cool wood of the door. The last flicker of doubt, the last trace of the sentimental mother they thought I was, had vanished. Their panic was my proof. They didn't see a mother. They saw an obstacle, a line item on a balance sheet that was suddenly causing a problem. Fine, I would be a problem. Oh, the boardroom was on the top floor. David had always said it was important to see the horizon. When I walked in, I realized Amanda and Robert had replaced the old oak table with a slab of black glass that seemed to suck all the light out of the room. It was long and cold, like a tomb. They were already there. Robert, Amanda, and their lawyer, a sharp-looking man who looked too young to have a soul. They sat on one side of the table, a united front of hostility. On the other side were the 3 other board members, men in their 70s who had known David for 40 years. They looked uncomfortable, lost in this new, sterile environment. They nodded at me, their faces grim. Robert was sitting in the chairman's seat, at the head of the table, on David's seat. He didn't stand when I entered. I walked, with Arthur a step behind me, not to the empty seat opposite him, but directly to the head of the table where he sat. I didn't say a word. I just stood there, my handbag in my hand, and looked at him. I waited. The silence in the room became heavy, suffocating. He looked at Amanda, who gave a slight, almost imperceptible shake of her head. He looked at his lawyer, who was suddenly very interested in his notepad. Finally, he looked at me, his face flushed. He pushed the chair back, the sound scraping loudly in the quiet, and moved to the seat next to Amanda. I placed my handbag on the table and sat down in the chair he had vacated. It was still warm. Arthur took the seat to my right. "All right," Robert began, trying to sound forceful, trying to seize control. "This meeting is irregular and, frankly, outrageous. I assume, Mother, you have something you want to say so we can all get back to work." Before I could speak, Arthur placed his old leather briefcase on the table and opened it. He took out the original, leather-bound charter. The sight of it seemed to make Robert shrink in his chair. "This meeting," Arthur said, his voice calm and clear, cutting through Robert's bluster, "has been called in accordance with the bylaws. We have one item on the agenda, as noted in the official notice. We are here to review recent executive actions in light of Article 7, Section B." He opened the charter to the marked page. He didn't need to read it. He knew it by heart. But the theater was important. "The clause," Arthur said, addressing the whole table, "stipulates that if the designated heir takes actions which cause significant and demonstrable harm to the foundational values or public reputation of the company, control of the founder's majority share block is to be transferred to a legacy trust. The purpose of this trust is to safeguard the long-term integrity of the company over short-term profits." He looked up, his gaze sweeping over Robert and Amanda. "The sole trustee of this fund is Margaret Gable." Amanda's lawyer scoffed. "And what demonstrable harm are you alleging?" "The company is more profitable than ever." That was my cue. I leaned forward slightly, my hands resting on the cool glass of the table. All eyes were on me. "Profit," I said, my voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the room. "You're right. The numbers are good. But a company isn't just a balance sheet. David taught you that, Robert. Or at least, he tried to." I looked at my son. "Let's review some of your recent optimizations. You've fired 17 employees in the last month. You call them legacy staff. I call them the people who built this company with your father. You call it trimming costs. I call it cutting out the company's heart and memory. You lost 300 years of combined institutional knowledge for a short-term bump in the quarterly earnings." I shifted my gaze to Amanda. "You've rebranded. A new logo. A new mission statement on the wall downstairs, full of empty words like synergy and domination. Your father's portrait, the face of this company for 30 years, was taken down from the lobby. You call it modernizing. I call it erasing history. You cannot sell trust in the future when you show contempt for your own past." I looked at the old board members. I could see them nodding. They understood. Then I looked back at Robert. This was for him. And then there was the email, the one your assistant sent about your father's funeral. Robert opened his mouth to protest, to make an excuse, but I held up a hand, a small gesture, but it silenced him. "You said it was not economically feasible for you or your senior staff to attend. You weighed the act of honoring the man who gave you everything against a few hours of billable time, and you decided his memory wasn't a good investment." I let the words hang in the air. The room was utterly still. "You see, that's where you are so wrong," I said, my voice dropping even lower. "The greatest and most valuable asset this company has ever had wasn't its patents, or its factories, or its cash reserves. It was David's name. It was the trust people had in him, the trust of his employees, the trust of his customers, the trust of his partners. He built this entire enterprise on a foundation of loyalty and respect. And in 1 week, you and your wife have taken a sledgehammer to that foundation. You believe a company is a machine, but it's not. It's a living thing. It's made of people. I leaned back in the chair. The final piece was in place. You said your father's death was an unacceptable loss on the balance sheet. But the only unacceptable loss here is a leader who doesn't understand the value of people. The only thing that is truly economically unfeasible for this company is a CEO who has lost the trust of his own family and his own employees. You have lost both. I looked at Arthur. He nodded. I looked at the 3 old men on the board. One of them, Bill Henderson, who had been David's first partner, gave me a slow, deliberate nod of his own. That was all I needed. Therefore, I said, my voice firm and final, in accordance with Article 7, Section B of the company charter, the clause has been triggered. I am assuming my role as the sole trustee of the Gable Legacy Trust, effective immediately. I am now in control of the majority shares. I looked down the long, cold table at my son. He was pale, his mouth slightly open. He looked utterly lost. This meeting is adjourned. For a moment, nobody moved. The shock was a physical thing in the room. Then Robert's lawyer started shuffling his papers, whispering furiously to him. Robert looked at me, his eyes full of a pathetic, dawning horror. You can't, he whispered. This is illegal. Amanda stood up abruptly. Her face was a white, controlled mask of fury. She knew I would. She knew. Amanda knew the game was over. She didn't scream or argue. The mask of controlled fury simply crumbled, revealing a raw, ugly emptiness beneath. She grabbed Robert's arm, her fingers digging into his expensive suit, and pulled him towards the door. He stumbled after her like a puppet whose strings had been cut. He was still muttering, "It's illegal, it's theft," but there was no conviction in it. He was just making noise. The door clicked shut behind them. The silence they left behind was vast and absolute. For a long moment, the 4 of us, me, Arthur, and the 2 other old board members just sat there. Then Bill Henderson, a man who'd started with David in the garage 40 years ago, cleared his throat. "Well," he said, a slow smile spreading across his weathered face. "That was more interesting than the usual quarterly report." He looked at me, and his eyes, which had been so full of weary resignation, were suddenly clear and bright. "What's your first order of business, Chairman?" I took a breath. The first deep breath I'd taken in what felt like a lifetime. The ice inside me was finally beginning to melt, and I felt a wave of exhaustion so profound I thought I might just slide out of the chair. But it was a good exhaustion, the kind you feel after a day of hard, necessary work. "First," I said, my voice a little unsteady, "I want to find my husband's portrait." We walked out of the boardroom. The news had already spread through the office with the speed of a lit fuse. People were standing in the doorways of their offices, in hushed groups by the water cooler. They weren't cheering. They were just watching, their faces a mixture of shock, fear, and a tiny, fragile spark of hope. They looked at me as I passed. This old woman they probably only knew from company Christmas cards, and I tried to meet their eyes. I wanted them to see that the building wasn't haunted anymore. I didn't go home. I walked down the hall to the CEO's office, my husband's office. I pushed the door open. The sterile, empty room that had so horrified me was now just a space waiting to be filled again. Arthur followed me in. "Have them clear this out," I told him, waving a hand at the white sofa and the soulless glass awards. All of it. And call the facilities manager. His name is Frank. He's been here 30 years. Tell him to go down to the third-level storage basement. In the back corner, under a gray tarp, he'll find a painting. I want it back in the lobby. Today. And what about Robert and Amanda's personal effects? Arthur asked. Have them boxed up and sent to their home, I said. This is a place of business. Then I did the most important thing. I sat down at David's desk and I picked up the phone. Arthur had already pulled up the list on his tablet, the 17 names. The legacy staff. The first number I dialed was Mary's, David's secretary. She answered on the fourth ring, her voice small and tentative. Hello, Mary, I said. It's Margaret Gable. There was a long silence, and then I heard a soft, choked sob. Oh, Mrs. Gable. I was wondering, I said, my own voice thick with emotion, if you'd be interested in coming back to work. Your desk is just as you left it. Her quiet crying was the only answer I needed. I went down the list, one by one. A forklift operator with 25 years of service. An accountant who'd helped me balance the books in the early days. A security guard who knew the names of everyone's children. With every call, I felt like I was putting a piece of the company's soul back where it belonged. 2 hours later, Frank and another man in overalls arrived at the office door. Between them, they carried the portrait. David's laughing face. I led them down to the lobby. The pale rectangle on the wall was waiting. I watched them work, the familiar sounds of a drill and the clink of hardware echoing in the marble hall. As they lifted the portrait into place, a crowd started to gather. Employees, trickling out from their cubicles, drawn by the activity. When the hook settled and the painting hung straight, a spontaneous sound went through the lobby, a soft wave of applause. It wasn't for me, it was for him. It was for the return of something they thought was lost forever. I stood there for a moment, under the portrait of my smiling husband. I looked at the faces watching me, old faces I recognized, young faces I didn't. They were all looking at me, waiting. I had never given a speech in my life. I wasn't a corporate leader. I was just David's wife. So I spoke to them as her. I know a lot of you don't know me, I began. My voice wasn't loud, but it was clear, and they all fell silent to listen. My name is Margaret Gable. A long time ago, my husband and I started this company on our kitchen table. It wasn't about mission statements or fourth quarter projections. It was about building something good, something that would last. It was about family. I paused, looking around at them. Somewhere along the way, we lost that. Some people started to believe that numbers were more important than names. That efficiency was more important than loyalty. They were wrong. I looked up at David's portrait, then back at the crowd. This company has always been a family, and there have been some unfortunate disagreements. But I am back now, and my only job is to fix it. To make this a place where people are valued again, where your work is respected and your history is honored. I took a breath. So, let's get back to work. That was all. But it was enough. The applause this time was louder, more confident. I saw people smiling, really smiling. I saw Mary, who had come straight to the office after my call, wiping a tear from her eye. I spent the rest of the day in David's office. Arthur and I worked with the board to formalize the transition. We sent out the memos, rescinding the termination notices. We started the long, slow process of undoing the damage. Late that night, long after everyone else had gone home, I was still sitting at David's desk. The office was quiet. The city lights twinkled outside the big window. I wasn't the grieving widow anymore. rattling around in an empty house. I wasn't a sentimental old woman. I had a purpose. I had a job to do. I was surrounded by David's books, his memory, his legacy. I wasn't just his wife. I was his partner again, and we had a company to run. It's been a year. I still sit in David's chair, at his desk, but it doesn't feel like his office anymore. It feels like ours. The cold glass awards are gone, replaced by the old, worn leather armchair in the corner. The walls are covered in his books again, and on the credenza, the photos are back. Robert on his bicycle, our family squinting in the sun at the beach, and a few new ones, Mary's granddaughter at her graduation. Frank, the facilities manager, holding up a giant fish he caught on his retirement trip, a trip the company paid for. The room has a soul again. The company is quieter now. The frantic, desperate energy that Amanda had injected into it is gone. The business is steady. We are profitable, more so than before, but it's a different kind of profit. It's solid. It's built on the loyalty I bought back, one phone call at a time. I don't hear from Robert or Amanda. Their lawyers sent a few threatening letters in the beginning, full of sound and fury, but they signified nothing. As Arthur said, you can't sue someone for enforcing the rules you broke. They are just gone. A bad investment that was written off. I don't think about them. They have been archived. My work now is different. It's not about fighting anymore. It's about building. Last month, I sat down with Arthur and the board, and we created something new, not a product line or a marketing strategy. We created the David Gable Scholarship Fund. It's for students of engineering and business from families who can't afford tuition. It's for the kids who are smart and hungry, the ones who have big dreams but small means. It's for the boys and girls who are like he was, starting with nothing but a fire in their belly. Today, I met the first recipient. His name is Leo. He came to my office, a tall, skinny boy of about 19, with big, clumsy hands and eyes that seemed to be taking in everything at once. He wore a jacket that was a little too big for him and clutched a worn portfolio to his chest. He was so nervous his hand was shaking when I offered him a cup of coffee. He reminded me so much of David, it was an ache in my chest. He sat in the leather armchair across from me, perched on the edge as if he might bolt. He started talking about his ideas, designs for more efficient solar panels, his words tumbling out in a rush of excitement. He wasn't arrogant, he was just alive with possibility. He spoke of building things, of making a difference, not of dominating markets or optimizing assets. My father was a mechanic, he told me, his eyes shining. He could fix anything. He always said, "It's not about the money, Leo. It's about leaving things better than you found them." This scholarship, Mrs. Gable, it's not just the money. It's knowing that someone believes that too. We talked for an hour. I told him stories about David, about the early days. I showed him the picture of the two of us on that empty plot of land. He looked at it for a long time, his expression full of reverence. When he left, he shook my hand, his grip firm and sure this time. "I won't let you down," he said. I knew he wouldn't. This evening, after everyone else has gone home, I'm sitting here in the quiet. The city is a tapestry of lights outside my window. A letter arrived by messenger this afternoon. It's from Leo. A handwritten thank you note on simple lined paper. "Dear Mrs. Gable," it begins. "I don't know how to thank you. Today wasn't just about a scholarship. It was about being reminded of why I wanted to build things in the first place. You didn't just give me a chance at an education. You gave me a legacy to live up to." I fold the letter carefully. I have a small, simple silver frame on my desk. I open the back, take out the stock photo of a smiling stranger, and I put Leo's letter inside. I place it on the credenza, right next to the photograph of David and me, the one of us squinting in the sun all those years ago. The past and the future, side by side. My tea has gone cold on the desk beside me. I look at the two frames, at the legacy of the man I loved, and the future he is still creating, even now. Robert called his father's funeral economically unfeasible. He was wrong about so many things. A funeral is about the past, but a legacy is about the future. Reviving the soul of what David built, ensuring it helps boys like Leo build their own dreams. That has been the most valuable investment of my life. And I finally feel at peace. The books are balanced. The accounts are settled.